Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Saturday, June 16th, 2018. Let's take a look at Carlotta in the Eastern Pacific first. I neglected to cover this yesterday. It may have popped up while I was doing my update, but I don't like to make excuses. If I missed something, I missed it. Luckily, it's not a hurricane or anything major, so in this case, that it slipped past me, I'll forgive myself. 45 knots, hugging the coast, a rainfall problem, which, as I talk about, can be a big problem in and of itself. Will eventually move inland. It's a very slow mover. Luckily, too, it's also very small in its aerial coverage. Its size, as you can see here in this satellite loop from the weathernerds.org site, fairly small, although some of these feeder bands that are coming in here can pack quite a punch in terms of very heavy rain, and eventually the circulation will move into Mexico and bring all that heavy rain with it. But remember, this is a mountainous area here, and that can cause mudslides and flash flooding. Luckily, after Carlotta, there's nothing else brewing in the Eastern Pacific, as this favorable period that we have just seen that gave us Aletta and then Bud, both of those reaching Category 4, hurricane intensities, that pattern is moving on, so we won't have to worry about anything else for a few days at least. In the Atlantic, this system has created a little bit of a stir out on the internet, and it's part of the overall package that was Invest Area 91L. I don't think it's anything right now. It's not labeled as an invest as far as I know, and I guess that if it became better organized, maybe they would call it 92L, or would it still be 91L? It doesn't matter too much, but for those of us that track these things, maybe it does. The development chances have gone up just a little bit now to 20% over the next few days, still very low, and the other way to look at that is there's an 80% chance this won't develop further, but just looking at it, it's fairly menacing sitting out there. There is a surface trough carved out through here, and most of the inclement weather to the north of that surface trough, and some of those winds in there in the thunderstorm activity, as I mentioned yesterday, could be the case. Definitely strong, especially when you get those downdrafts that come out of any of those heavier thunderstorms that blossom up, and there's a little bit of that here right over the Yucatan, and it's going to take another day or so for this to clear the pattern, and unfortunately, in doing that, it's going to move up in this direction and bring quite a bit of heavy rainfall. Exactly where that rainfall sets up and who receives that and how much, etc., we'll just have to wait and see. My other computer talking to me over there. So looking at the surface map from the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch at the National Hurricane Center, there's the surface trough. Of course, if I outline it in white, you can't see it right there. And another one over here in the Western Gulf. Some of the modeling indicating that this might try to drift north and develop next week sometime in the vicinity of the Western Gulf of Mexico. So somewhere down through this area may see something try to spin up. And at that point, the pattern will be a little bit more favorable in this part of the world as the Madden-Julian oscillation becomes more conducive. And we talked about that the other day with Dr. Ventris from the Weather Company. Remember that? If you didn't see that on YouTube, be sure to check it out. And here's the visible shot. A really beautiful shot here. Animation, GIF animation showing the GO 16 product over the Gulf of Mexico here with all that convection. Maybe some broad turning overall, but it's very broad, okay, and you have to kind of really look for it. Certainly a larger area of lower pressure, perhaps with that surface trough, but nothing concentrated just yet. And it still really doesn't look like it'll do much more consolidating, but you never say never, right? The computer models, I think this system is large enough in its size that if it were going to develop, the computer models would have picked it up. But you never know. I always remember Umberto. Now we're talking almost 11 years ago now. That was in 2007, and that popped up very close to shore up here in a very quick time frame. So you just never know. The upper level winds, kind of a mixed bag. Favorable over here to the west of the system, kind of near where the surface trough itself is, but destructive shearing winds outside of that, as a large upper level trough is carved out over the region. Definitely not your ideal scenario. Looking at the vorticity at the 5,000 foot level, kind of elongated in here. You don't see it concentrated too much. But if we move up in the atmosphere to the 500 millibar level, there is one little lobe maybe trying to close off there. But you see the overall pattern here is just a large area of energy, and that's what this shows me. This shows me the structure of the system, and everything seems to be kind of spread out. And I wonder if this is the leftovers of Bud, or if it's still hung up down here. Maybe it's stretched out like roadkill along the interstate. And that's a terrible analogy, but sometimes that'll happen. You deposit part of the system, snagged up here, and the rest of it moves off to the northeast. Sometimes you'll see that. And there is the signature at 500 millibars, which is about 18,000 feet in the atmosphere of Tropical Storm Carlotta, which is interesting because it looks more organized at 500 millibars, middle part of the atmosphere, than it does in the lower levels. Interesting. Just a little tidbit there. Doesn't mean anything really. So the water temperature is definitely warm enough in the Gulf. Just thought I'd point this out. Lots of 82, and that's 82 degrees, not 80 TOO. 82 degrees Fahrenheit or higher across much of the Gulf of Mexico on the surface. If we take a peek at the upper ocean heat content, plenty of that as well, and a couple of lingering effects from the cold. I'm convinced that this thing's going to hang on for like a couple more weeks to finally get rid of that last 2 or 3% that it's got its claws in me. But the upper ocean heat content definitely on the increase, as we'd expect this time of year. So there is enough energy for this system to develop, yet something's just not there that's allowing it. And if we look at the GFS, this is, well, let me just stop and go back to the first shot here. Here's a pretty good idea of where that surface trough is. Change colors to blue right through here. And if we put this into motion, you see nothing's ever able to really close off. You just get this elongated area of curvature heading up into the lower and upper Texas coast eventually. Maybe southwest Louisiana. Just this deep flow coming up through here, bringing lots of moisture. So there's going to be periods of very heavy rain, gusty winds, rip current threat increasing for Texas and coastal Mexico as well. So just be mindful of that. But again, the model's not indicating any signature of real development here, which is great. Heavy rain is going to be an issue enough, and some areas will receive some flooding, no doubt. And if that happens over Metro Houston and vicinity, where you're very susceptible to such events causing problems, well, needless to say, take it easy as that starts to unfold, all right? And even the Euro, this is from tropicaltidbits.com, not indicating too much. This is hour 0. I'm sorry, this is 24 hours. This is Sunday morning, and you can see the reflection of that little trough right there, that little kink in the isobars, the lines of equal pressure. They're not closed off. You don't have a closed isobar with a low pressure in the middle. It's just this surface trough, this little weakness area of convergence that's allowing the convection to persist, and that approaches the Texas coast. And then sometime Monday morning, the Europeans suggesting maybe a weak low pressure area well to the south of Brownsville tries to develop. It drifts north a little bit, so maybe some rainfall for the Rio Grande Valley, and that's not a bad thing if it's not too heavy. And you can see that, the overall perturbation in the pressure field down here, it's perturbed, it's different, it's changed, indicating there is some kind of a disturbance that both the GFS and the European are indicating will be there. And I think this will be more of a rainmaker, squally conditions from time to time over very warm water, so you're going to get some heavy downpours, some thunderstorms from time to time, and maybe a weak tropical type system by Wednesday. It's just something to watch for. 30, 40 mile per hour winds, possibly a depression. we'll see. The Hurricane Center certainly will be on top of it, and we'll see how this evolves. Obviously, we're not seeing the signature of anything strong, and that certainly is great news. We can eliminate storm surge and high winds and those nastiness hazards and just focus on the rain, the choppy seas, and those rip currents. Please don't underestimate that. I like having everybody that can possibly watch these videos be able to watch them, and if you drown in a rip current, you can't do so. All right? Goes without saying, so be careful out there, be mindful, and watch for those double red flags or whatever the local lifeguard and beach patrol people set up, because it's there to keep you safe. Looking at the precip over the next 7 days, yep, look at this, most of the lower 48. If this was exactly right, like if everybody received that much water, you'd have just one huge lake called the North American Lake. It's not that much rain, actually, a little over an inch for most areas. But you see some of these reds are showing up, some tropical influences, probably still coming out of the Pacific side here, interacting with the front would be my guess. And this is the southeasterly flow and tropical waves and surface troughs, whatever, kind of interacting there and giving you some very heavy rain in some areas of Texas, northeast Mexico. This is not an exact forecast. This gives you an idea of the potential. And I guess it's good that there's not too much in the way of drought in most of the U.S. Out west, though, you're getting left out, which is typical this time of year. We'll see. Maybe that'll change later on. Don't forget, I am on Patreon. What an interesting new way to support creators. I've been following them on Twitter the last few days, and it is remarkable. And we have grown our Patreon support very significantly in the month of June, the end of May through June, and I want to continue that. And we can do a lot of great things. So check it out, patreon.com/HurricaneTrack, and become a supporter in the long term. I still have 20 more years that I want to do this, maybe even more than that. So I need your help to do it. I want to make it like public radio, so to speak, where we are member supported by the people, and then we can just do whatever we want to do. It'll be great. Not that we haven't been, but we can expand on that greatness. All righty? That is it from me for today. Have a great rest of your Saturday. I'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks as always for tuning in. We'll talk again on Sunday.